Did you want to go? Your Honor, pretty simple. These are, if you're talking about Borsanger and Chubb, I believe, or Grubb.
Grubb, yeah.
Chubb's a defensive end for the Broncos. Sorry. Bradley Chubb. Your Honor, both of those are folks that are formers from J&J. The way we read the rule is it's discretionary on Your Honor's behalf. You don't have to let a deposition be used. The terms that are in the statute are may. We don't believe these folks are unavailable at all. What we did during the depositions was, with Borsanger specifically, we talked about his travel schedule, his ability to travel, and all that. He said he would, hadn't been asked, but didn't see the reason why he couldn't travel down here for trial. He was defended by O'Melveny, I believe. Grubb was defended by Alston Bird, I think, and also O'Melveny was there. They, to our understanding, have a joint defense agreement. He was at, I believe, Naramco, and then they were divested. So we think they are within the control of J&J. They have the ability to get them here. And based upon the court's comments the other day with the doctors here locally, we agree that the best way to deal with a witness who can be brought here is to have them under oath. Those are discovery depositions. We'd like to be able to cross-examine them here in front of the court in that chair under oath. So I think it's a discretionary call for Your Honor. I don't believe that these gentlemen are not available. I just believe that the defendants will say there may be some inconvenience or they're trying to avoid that. But in a trial of this magnitude, when their legal expenses and their travel expenses are being paid by the defendants, I just don't see that there's an issue. So that's the shortest way to make it to the court, and that's the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beckworth. Mr. Ottaway.
Thank you, Your Honor. The statute, which I think Your Honor has handled for you, hopefully you've seen our brief.
I have.
Allows for the use of these video depositions. No ifs, ands, or buts. Mr. Borsanger is an ex-employee. He retired several years ago. Mr. Grubb is not an employee. He's an employee of a separate corporation. As you've heard, Naramco was divested several years ago by Johnson & Johnson, owned by somebody else. One lives in New Hampshire. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
There's just a noise. I think it's the end.
One lives in New Hampshire, one lives in New York. The statute allows for us to play their videotape depositions. All parties were present. We've cut those depositions down. Just like the 6 videotape depositions the state played, we're entitled to present the testimony by videotape. We've subpoenaed those witnesses, as Your Honor has already ruled, when the state objected to the videotape being used. That are here in Oklahoma, but that has nothing to do with this issue. These are formers, as he says. They're not under our control. They're outside of Oklahoma, and that's why we do videotape depositions.
Now, I'm going to overrule the state's objection and motion and allow for Borsanger and Grubb to appear via video. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we'll invite Commissioner White back to the witness stand, and Mr. Brody can resume his cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. White.
Hi there.
We are in the home stretch, and I am fairly confident I'm going to be able to keep it to the 45 minutes that I predicted before we broke for lunch. When we broke, we were looking at Exhibit 1644. Do you still have that with you?
Yes.
And that is the board packet for the July 9th, 2014 meeting, correct?
I see that.
And I want you to turn to page 26. And this is a discussion that continues from the prior page related to opioid prescriptions in pregnant women. You there?
Yes.
And in the discussion, the Healthcare Authority indicates that in light of recent studies suggesting the teratogenic potential of these medications and the known risks of neonatal withdrawal after in utero exposure, this is a significant public health concern. Current proposals to limit inappropriate opioid use by Sooner Care members during pregnancy include a computer edit that would prevent an opioid claim to pay while a woman is pregnant without prior authorization approval. Prior to implementing this prior authorization restriction, a pro-DUR edit that is overridable at the pharmacy will be implemented to monitor opioid claims processed during pregnancy, right?
Yes, I see that.
So at this time, what OHCA did was put in an edit that could be overridden at the pharmacy level, correct?
It looks like it.
All right, now let's move forward 2 years to 2016, if I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Give us a moment, Your Honor. They were a step ahead. We got it.
Thank you.
And we see this is a September 14th, 2016 DUR board packet, correct?
Yes.
And Your Honor, we moved J 1763 into evidence, request permission to publish.
No objection.
J 1763 will be admitted into the evidence and you may publish.
And if you would, Ms. White, I want to focus on a memorandum that is included at page 13 of the meeting packet. And this memorandum is from Nancy Nesser, the pharmacy director for the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, correct? Or two,
No,
I'm sorry, Ms.
yeah.
Nesser.
Yes, it's to Nancy Nesser.
And it's from Bethany Holdery, the clinical coordinator for pharmacy management consultants, right?
Yes, that's what it says.
And the subject of this memo is DUR board recommendations from the meeting. Looks like it took place the prior day, July 13th, 2016.
Yes, I see that.
And this is exactly 2 years after the prior document we looked at, 1644, where we looked at the overridable edit, right?
It appears to be.
And the first recommendation, there's an indication, it's opioid prescriptions in pregnant women, motion carried by unanimous approval, right?
Yes, I see that.
And what was approved were methods for reducing rates of opioid use in pregnant women recommended by the College of Pharmacy in collaboration with the Healthcare Authority, correct? That's at the bottom of that paragraph. Alternative methodologies.
I see that. Excuse me.
And what was included there were provider education, and then a clinical edit at the pharmacy level for members with a pregnancy indicator in the Sooner Claims database. The edit would recommend members be switched to buprenorphine when running a claim for an opioid medication, but could be overridden without prior authorization submission if deemed appropriate, right?
It says that?
And so this is the overridable edit put in place based on the recommendations and considerations discussed in the July 2014 meeting 2 years prior, right?
This edit is talking about an override for norepinephrine, which it didn't say in the last document you showed me.
Right, and it's an override for buprenorphine when running a claim for an opioid medication, correct?
Correct.
Now, further into that document, if you would please turn to page 34. We're going to pick up on another discussion that we saw 2 years prior in July 2014, here in July of 2016. You there?
I'm on page 34.
And this is the subject that we addressed before lunch, which is concomitant benzo and opioid use, right?
It says that?
And we see that there's first an introduction. There's analysis on page 35 of concomitant benzo and opioid sooner care claims, right?
I see that.
And if we look at that, we see, based on therapy length, we can pull out the first chart, Ms. Conway. For a 12-month period determined by paid claims for a benzo and an opioid medication for 90 consecutive days or greater, we see over 7,800 members at 90 days or more, 6,400 members at 180 days or more, and 5,100 members at 300 days or more, correct?
I see that.
And then if you turn to the following page, there is a discussion of this issue by the healthcare authority. And in the first paragraph, there's a reference to 3 studies that are specifically highlighted in the CDC guidelines. And we're in 2016 now, right?
That's correct.
And the healthcare authority recognizes that 3 of the studies specifically highlighted in the CDC guidelines found evidence of concurrent benzo and opioid use in 31 to 61% of fatal overdoses. Correct?
Yes, I see that.
And they indicate that reduction of concurrent use of benzos and opioid medications will likely lead to a reduction in prescription drug overdose deaths, right?
I see that.
And if you turn to page 37, you can see the recommendations that were made in 2016. You there?
Yes.
And you see the indication that the College of Pharmacy recommends the following: working with the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority and Prescription Drug Fatality Task Force on targeting education to prescribers in specific counties with high rates of overdose death rates or concomitant benzo and opioid prescribing, right?
I see that.
And it was only, so what was being recommended here was targeting prescribers, right?
Targeting education to prescribers in specific counties.
Exactly, targeting education for prescribers before implementing an edit, right?
Where does it say before implementing the edit?
What the next bullet, it says, if targeted educational interventions are ineffective at changing prescriber behaviors, consider implementation of an edit.
I see that.
Now, there's nothing wrong, I assume, with targeting prescribers to educate them about opioids, is there?
With this type of education, no.
And I assume you would agree there is nothing wrong with targeting prescribers to educate them about opioids with truthful information. Fair?
I would have no objection to truthful information being given to providers in the state of Oklahoma. I
All
think
right,
I've made
now-
clear my objections have been to misleading, false statements that were given to prescribers in Oklahoma.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You, Ms. White, are not a marketing expert, are you?
I thought that that was a discussion we had at the beginning of my testimony, and I thought I was qualified.
I'm not asking whether you were, what you were qualified in, how you were qualified. I'm asking you, Terry White, Commissioner of the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services Department for Oklahoma. Well, I'm asking you to confirm that you're not a marketing expert.
This has been asked and answered.
It hasn't been answered, and I frankly, I haven't asked it, Your Honor. It's the first time I've asked this.
Overruled.
So I have expertise in communications as the director of communications for my agency for years, and we do provide marketing and community education. So when you say marketing, you'd have to be more specific with me before I can answer that. Am I an expert in all types of marketing? No.
Do you recall giving a deposition in this case back in April? I think it was only about 2 months ago, Ms. White.
Yes.
Copy that. Sorry, we don't have the condensed version. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Ms. White, do you recognize that as a copy of the transcript of the deposition that you gave?
I believe it is.
And if you would, for me, please turn to page 15. And I want to call your attention to lines 3 to 12.
Hold on just a second, let me get there.
You there?
Yes.
And you were asked, you are not a marketing expert, correct? And you answered no. And then there was a statement, we're going to have a problem with double negatives, so I'll try and correct that when I hear that. You answered no problem. And you were asked again, but you are not a marketing expert, is that correct? And you answered correct, right? That was
Yes.
your testimony that you gave on April 11th, correct?
Yes.
All right. And now, you, in your testimony yesterday, referenced the various internal documents that you saw Mr. Whitten use with Mr. Stone, right?
Yes.
And as for any external communications from Janssen, you testified that you thought it was misleading to talk about low abuse of Duragesic. You recall that testimony?
I think so.
Now, in order to form that opinion, you did not review the actual underlying DAWN data on that subject, did you?
The underlying DAWN data? No, I did not review underlying DAWN data.
You did not review post-marketing surveillance data from the researched abuse, diversion, and addicted-related surveillance system for any year, did you?
I don't remember. I don't think so, but I don't remember.
You did not review Duragesic risk management plan progress reports for any year, did you?
Risk management plan progress reports?
Correct.
I don't think so.
All right. You didn't review any medical literature concerning comparative use of Duragesic and other medications, did you?
I may have looked at medical literature about Duragesic. I can't say for sure, for certain.
Sitting here today, you can't recall that research if you did look at it.
I cannot say for certain now.
All right. Let me ask you this. Wouldn't you want to see that data and that research before offering an opinion on low abuse of Duragesic and statements about the low abuse of Duragesic?
I believe based on the information that I've seen during trial and information that I reviewed prior to trial, I can absolutely say that I feel that, I think and saw that Johnson and Janssen provided misleading information about the abuse of opioids, which would include Duragesic. And materials did not exclude Duragesic, did not say low abuse potential for all opioids except Duragesic all of the time, although there were definitely places that Johnson and Janssen seemed to imply Duragesic was somehow safer, even though it's just as dangerous and in fact a more potent medication than other opioids. So I feel very comfortable in those statements.
So I can take that as no, you do not want to see the data?
I'm happy to look at any data you want to show me.
So you would want to see the data before offering an opinion about what the data shows?
I feel like I looked at enough information to be certain in my opinion. If there's something else you want me to look at, I'm happy to look at it.
And you're confident sitting here on the witness stand, in your opinion, without having reviewed the underlying DAWN data, any post-market surveillance data from the researched abuse, diversion, and addiction-related surveillance system for any year, any Duragesic risk management plan progress reports for any year, and that you can recall medical literature concerning comparative abuse. Do I understand that correctly?
I am completely confident in what I've stated just a moment ago with the information that I've looked at and what I've seen during trial, that Johnson and Janssen had said very clearly that there are low abuse potential for opioids without excluding Duragesic, and that Johnson and Janssen provided information that implied or even said Duragesic has a lower abuse for potential, despite the fact that it's a highly potent and more potent opioid than most of the opioids that you all were doing non-branded marketing for. Yes, I feel very comfortable saying that.
Okay, thank you. You also offered testimony in response to questions from Mr. Witten based on a chart that shows CDC MMWR data from 2011, and I believe the version you looked at may have been from S0906, if we can pull that up. You remember this?
I do remember this.
And you testified that the red and the blue lines go up in parallel to sales. That was your testimony, correct?
I don't remember if those were my exact words, but that's what I think this chart shows.
And may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
And just a simple question, Ms. White. Have you made any effort to look at what was happening to sales of Janssen's opioids during this time period?
I believe I have seen documents that show what was happening with Janssen's products during this time period.
And what
And when you say products, do you mean the products that you manufactured, or do you also mean the products that you provided the ingredients for? Because I think they both show an increase.
Well, Ms. White, as you know from sitting here in the trial, a different company, it's not named as a defendant here, called Naramco, manufactured active pharmaceutical ingredients that went into various medications. You know that, right?
Objection, Your Honor. I think our evidence that you took judicial notice of showed they took the money, they're the same company. It's already been covered.
Your Honor, that's not a proper objection, but I'm happy to rephrase.
I'm going to sustain the objection, just rephrase the question.
Sure. Let me focus you on, you understand that Janssen marketed 2 Schedule II opioids, Duragesic and Nucynta, right?
That's not all you marketed, if that's what you're asking me.
Have you looked at what happened with sales of Duragesic and Nucynta during this time period reflected on the chart here?
Yes, I believe I have seen documents about the sales of those products during this time period.
Okay, so you understand then that there were no sales of Nucynta until 2009, correct?
I don't think it was released until 2009. I think that Janssen and Johnson & Johnson chose, at the height of the opioid crisis, to release a new opioid into the market in Oklahoma called Nucynta in 2009 when we already had an oversupply.
Your Honor, I'm going to move to strike the answer as non-responsive.
I
The
think she
question
answered the
was,
question. She just didn't like it.
Overruled.
and you know that Duragesic went off patent in 2005, correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
And have you looked at the underlying document that is cited as the source for this chart?
I think, I'm not going to speculate. I think I may have, I am not certain.
All right, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
This is already in evidence, Your Honor.
You may publish.
And Ms. White, I've handed you a copy of Exhibit S 1223. You there?
Yes.
And this is the CDC report that is the source for the chart that you looked at, right?
I think so. I'm not certain, but I think so.
All right, I'll represent to you there has been testimony in this case from various witnesses identifying this as the source. And if you look at page 12, you'll recall that Dr. Kolodny was asked questions about the chart on page 12 and how his version of it in S0906 reflected additional data and extended it beyond the time period in the CDC source document. Do you recall that testimony?
Are you flipping back to the chart form? Can you show me the other chart real quick? Do you mind?
Sure. Do you want to show S0906? Ms. Conway, thank you.
So I don't remember his testimony on it, but it does appear that there's additional data on this slide, if that's what you're asking me.
All right, thank you. If we take a look at this, we see an indication, if you go to page 2, I want you to look at the first full paragraph on that page. And we see the indication, states regulate the use of prescription drugs such as OPR and the practices of prescribers and pharmacists. States also finance and regulate healthcare for Medicaid populations, which are at greater risk for overdose. States therefore have a central role in ensuring that OPR are used legally and safely. You see that?
I see that.
I take it you would not disagree with that statement, would you?
I think that states have had to step up and have a central role in combating the opioid crisis because we're the only people doing it. I think that when you talk about the state's role as it relates to the Medicaid population, I think it's really important that the court understand that for prescription opioids, that the Medicaid agency in Oklahoma provided and paid for less than 30% and probably closer to less than 20% of all opioid sales that took place in the state of Oklahoma. certainly over 70% and likely over 80% of the sales of those products were not paid for by the Medicaid agency in this state. And while we are focused and have been for the last day and a half almost now on the Medicaid population, that is only a sliver of the opioids sold in the state of Oklahoma, and it is a very small sliver that is being focused on.
Was that a yes? You do agree with that statement?
I do believe states have to play a central role in this crisis because in Oklahoma, we're the only ones fighting it at the moment.
Now, the state of Oklahoma regulates all doctors who prescribe opioids in the state of Oklahoma, not just those who prescribe to Medicaid patients, correct?
The state of Oklahoma licenses all doctors that prescribe in the state of, that prescribe in our state. Is that what you're asking me?
I'm asking if the state of Oklahoma regulates the practice of medicine for all doctors in the state of Oklahoma, not just those who prescribe to Medicaid patients, correct?
Yes.
And the PMP applies to all doctors in the state of Oklahoma, not just those who prescribe to Medicaid patients, correct?
Correct.
And OBN is tasked with investigating all diversion and abuse of opioids in the state of Oklahoma, not just opioids that may have been prescribed by a Medicaid provider, correct?
They are tasked and don't have the resources to meet it adequately as of yet.
Now let's turn back to the Healthcare Authority and the issue we were talking about, which is concomitant use of benzos and opioids. The Healthcare Authority does not currently, today, have an edit in place to limit concomitant benzo and opioid use, does it?
We didn't look at an edit that related to that around pregnant women.
I'm talking about concomitant use of benzos and opioids. And as you recall, what we looked at was the decision was made to target providers with education about opioids, but not to put that edit into the system.
What I saw was that it said it recommended education first before the edit. I didn't see whether it said the edit had ever been put in place or not.
Well, my question to you is, has the edit ever been put in place?
I don't know.
Not something you looked at in coming up with the opinions that you offered the court on causation issues yesterday. Fair.
Yeah, what I looked at in terms of causation is,
Simple question as to whether that's something you looked at or not, Ms. White.
and I'm trying to answer that question. So I looked at the fact that from the 1920s until 1996, we had opioids, we had doctors, we had patients, and nothing changed. And in 1996, something changed. We didn't have an edit for opioids in the healthcare authority system all those years. And I did not look to see if we had one now, because what I was trying to figure out is why that sales line spiked, because that's the only thing that changed in nearly the last 100 years.
And what was it, Ms. White, that changed in 1996?
Johnson & Johnson and Janssen and a host of their key partners and other manufacturers decided that they were going to market opioids, both branded and unbranded, and convince people that we had an under-treatment of pain and that there was a low risk of abuse and a low danger from using these products. And at that point is exactly what I was talking about yesterday when I said that Johnson & Johnson and Janssen unleashed bombs across the United States of America that landed squarely in Oklahoma, that was in the form of a sales force that had $30 million of marketing behind it, that was in the form of convincing people through key opinion leaders that we had undertreated pain, that was in the form of a host of things that caused an opioid crisis in the state of Oklahoma. And that's the only thing that changed in that nearly 100-year period. And it started in 1996.
In 1996.
Well, there may have been some pre-work in 1995, but 1996, Purdue, Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, and a host of other people, but specifically Johnson & Johnson and Janssen, began in targeting Oklahoma and other states with this type of marketing. One of the things I talked about yesterday was the consensus statement written in 1997 by the Johnson & Johnson lawyer that started a host, if you'll remember, a host through the American Academy of Pain Medicine and the American Pain Society. This idea, and I read you part of this statement yesterday, and I'm happy to read it again, about the undertreatment of pain and the low abuse potential for opioids. So 1996, 97, yes, that's what I'm saying.
So are we now extending the time period up into 97?
1996 is what I'm saying, and I'm saying this statement was 97.
All right, so you're sticking with something happened in 1996 and that changed the trajectory.
Correct, and continued after 1996.
Now, you've been here in court almost every day of this trial, although as we established yesterday, not during the time when Dr. Kolodny was being cross-examined by Mr. Yoder about his assertions on Mr. Angarola, right?
I believe that I was here for part of Dr. Kolodny's cross-examination, and I watched part of Dr. Kolodny's cross-examination. I cannot remember if I was sitting in the courtroom at that point or not.
All right. And in the course of sitting in this courtroom for the course of trial, you presumably, and I don't know if you were here through these depositions that were played, have heard the state's lawyers accuse really Aramco, I guess, of failing to sever a relationship with Purdue following Purdue's 2007 criminal guilty plea. You've heard that, right?
I want to say I think so, but I'm not certain. I don't know if those were the words used, but I think that concept, but I'm not certain.
All right, let's take a look at a couple documents, if I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Ms. White, I've handed you a document that's marked as J3757. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do.
This is an email chain produced by the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority in this case, and it includes Carrie Wade from the Healthcare Authority, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, we offer 3757 into evidence.
Objection.
J3757 will be admitted into the evidence. You may publish.
Thank you. And if we can go to page 4, Ms. Conway. And if we pull out the title under Carrie Wade's name, we see that she is the Pharmacy Operations Manager with the Healthcare Authority. See that? We have it pulled up on the screen here.
Yes, I see that. I'm sorry. I heard you say it. I didn't know you were asking a question. I apologize.
I was asking whether this email identifies Carrie Wade as the Pharmacy Operations Manager for the Healthcare Authority.
Yes, that's what it says.
And if you go to the prior page, page 3 of the document, you'll see a reference to the person that she is emailing with, Amanda, in the middle of the page. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we can pull that out, Ms. Conway, that's Amanda Zanetti, Manager of Government Contracts with Purdue Pharma LP, right?
That's what it says?
And the email from Ms. Wade on page 4 to Ms. Zanetti, first paragraph, if we can pull out page 4, Ms. Conway. There's an indication the OHCA has recently met and reviewed the bids for 2015. See that? And there's an indication that she wanted to thank Ms. Linetti for the supplemental rebate bid submission, and that she appreciated her company's effort to offer additional rebates and partner with the state of Oklahoma to better serve our members, correct?
I see that.
So this is, what's the date on this email again?
It is.
We go to the prior page, November 21st, 2014.
Yes, that's what it says.
And on November of 2014, the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority was pleased to partner with Purdue, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think what this is saying is basically.
I'm sorry. I simply asked you if the Healthcare Authority, Ms. Wade, indicated that she was pleased to partner with Purdue in November of 2014.
I understand your question, I believe. Can I answer it?
I think you did.
I haven't answered it.
I think you acknowledged that is specifically what she communicated. If there's some commentary you feel that you need to make on it, Mr. Whitten will have a chance to ask you for your interpretation if you feel like there's some interpretation that needs to be made of this document.
All you allowed me to say was, I think.
Pardon me, Commissioner. That is not fair. That's not consistent with previous objections where, once again, he's interrupting the witness. He can object to non-responsive after she answers, but I think she has a right to answer. I know you didn't want to hear it.
I sustain the objection.
Go ahead.
I think what this is saying is that they're pleased that the price was dropped. I think that's what it's saying. And so, yes, it says, we appreciate your company's efforts to offer additional rebates and partner with the state of Oklahoma. I think all it's simply saying is we appreciate the fact that the price is lower.
And the price is going to be lower for Purdue's opioid medications, correct?
That's my understanding.
Due to supplemental rebates, right?
I believe that's what it says.
Supplemental rebates are extra payments from pharmaceutical manufacturers to the state on top of the federal rebate, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And states do not have to accept supplemental rebates, do they?
I don't know the answer to that.
I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I object to him using someone else's deposition to examine this witness.
Your Honor,
He's listed, pardon.
sorry.
Mr. Beasley's listed as a witness, I think, by both sides. And if he wants to impeach or refresh someone's memory, he can even introduce this into evidence in his case in chief. But to cross-examine this witness of that deposition is improper.
Your Honor, this is a corporate rep deposition. It's an admission of the state.
I have no objection to him introducing it here in his case in chief, which is coming up today. But to use it on Commissioner White is improper.
Your Honor, it's entirely appropriate for me to ask the state's trial corporate representative about an admission regarding supplemental rebates that was offered by the state's corporate representative on this topic specifically.
An admission is fine. It's admissible in his case in chief. But clearly what he's trying to do is impeach Commissioner White. He showed her the previous exhibit, which she hadn't seen before, and he asked her to interpret it. She did. Now he wants to impeach her with what someone else said. The impeachment part of that's improper. He can admit this during his case in chief.
Your Honor, if it's admissible during my case in chief, it's admissible during my cross-examination of Commissioner
I
White.
overrule the objection.
Thank you. If you would, Ms. White, turn to page 469.
Hold on just a second. Is 469 the middle number between the dashes? Is that what you want me to look at?
I'm sorry, the middle number, there's
Page
page number, page 469. at the
What
top
it
of
says
every-
at the bottom, I'm sorry, what?
You look at the top of every page.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at this bottom and I was trying to see.
I think the bottom number is the phone number for the court reporter.
Okay. Oh, well. Not that then. 469?
Yes? There. And I want to draw your attention to line 3 through
Yes.
line 5. And you see
Line 3 or line 5? I'm
line
sorry.
3 through line 5.
Got it?
You see Mr. Beasley was asked, the state isn't required to accept supplemental rebates, are they? And he answered, no, we denied several of them, correct?
I see that.
All right. So let's, you would agree the state was not required to accept supplemental rebates from Purdue, right?
So what I said when you asked me the first time is I don't know, and what I can tell you now is that Burl Beasley said that they don't have to.
All right. Now, the state knew about Purdue's guilty pleas at the time the pleas occurred, correct?
I don't know if Carrie Wade knew about that or not.
The state of Oklahoma certainly knew that Purdue had pled guilty, right?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
All right. May I approach, Your Honor? 639.
Yes.
And Ms. White, you have in front of you an email from Mark Woodward. We talked about him earlier, correct?
We did.
He's at OBN as in a communications and legislative affairs function, correct?
Yes.
And he sent an email to all OBN employees, right?
That's what this says?
And the subject line is OBNDD, OxyContin maker pleads guilty, isn't it?
Yes.
And the headline there, he's forwarding an article from the Associated Press, OxyContin maker execs plead guilty, and it describes Purdue's plea, correct?
I haven't read it. I can tell you that's the title. I haven't read it to see if it describes Purdue's plea or not, but I could if you'd like me to.
All right, let's take a look at another one. 30.
Thank you.
Now, 3866 is an excerpt from the June 13th, 2007 Drug Utilization Review Board meeting packet, right?
You say it's an excerpt. Are you saying this is not the whole packet?
It's not the whole packet. This was an excerpt that was marked during a deposition in the case. Your Honor, we'll move the entire packet into evidence, but we'd like to focus on this excerpt right now.
As long as the whole thing's admitted later, no objection.
And Your Honor, I have spoken with Mr. Whitten before beginning this afternoon, and he has agreed that we will be allowed to offer without objection all of the Drug Utilization Review Board meeting packets, as well as the audio recordings from those meetings that were produced by the state at the conclusion of Ms. White's testimony, in lieu of having her identify and going through all of them. So that'll capture any that we have not looked at during the testimony.
Is this June 13th, 2007 particular board meeting, this is just a portion of the entire packet?
Right, and the entire packet, I have an agreement with Mr. Whitten, will come in.
So let's mark this J3866-A. and the entire board meeting packet can
Okay.
have the same number.
And before I do that, I'm reminded here that I did not move 637 into evidence, which was the last document we had looked at, which was the email from Mr. Woodward.
639.
Sorry.
No objection.
J639 will be admitted into the evidence.
And Mr. Brody's correct. At the same time, I did agree that he can introduce those items, although it hasn't saved any time, but I did agree.
It has saved time, that's
And are you moving J38668 into evidence?
Yes, thank you.
Without objection, they'll be admitted into the evidence.
All right, now, if you turn to Appendix J, which begins at page 6. And then flip forward to page 8. Is FDA news that was provided to the DUR board. And you see there, what was provided to the board was FDA's announcement of the results of its investigation into illegal promotion of OxyContin by the Purdue Frederick Company. See that?
I see that.
All right. And this was provided to the board for review at the meeting that included the Healthcare Authority as well as the College of Pharmacy, correct?
It appears so.
All right. Let's move forward. And we're pretty close to wrapping up here, but I want to show you 3875, if I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
And before I do that, OxyContin is still enjoys Tier 1 formulary placement with OHCA today, doesn't it?
I don't know if it's tier 1 or not.
Did the state ever tell Purdue that the state was going to stop working with Purdue because of its guilty plea?
I don't know.
All right. Now, Ms. White, I've handed you what we've marked as J3875. Oh, you have to. And this is a Quality Team 2015 project application, quantity limits on short-acting painkillers for the reduction of prescription opioid abuse from the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, right?
Yes, I think so.
And if you look at the bottom, it indicates it was prepared by Burl Beasley, right?
Yes.
Your Honor, we've moved 3875 into evidence and request permission to publish.
No objection.
J3875 will be admitted. Permission granted.
Thank you. And I want to look at the overview, Ms. White. You see the indication that in 2014, OHCA began planning the application of a computerized clinical decision support rule that would limit the number of short-acting oral painkillers reimbursed to pharmacies, right?
I see that.
And if you go down to the next full paragraph, you see that the computer edit put into operation by OHCA is called the quantity limit edit, right?
It says that.
And there's an indication that by January 2015, this is right in the middle there, the QLE restricted the amount of all short-acting oral opioid painkiller amounts prescribed per day, right?
I see that it says that.
And the reason that he cites is that by January but that the QLE was designed to reduce the number of painkillers funded by Sooner Care at OHCA, right?
I see that.
All right. Now, do you know,
The next sentence is also particularly important, where it explains that it's hoped that by reducing the number or supply, is what I would say that equates to, the number of painkillers made available, this would therefore reduce the incident of prescription overdose deaths in Oklahoma.
and I agree with you on that point, Ms. White. As we saw, actions like these have the potential to impact prescribing, don't they?
Actions like these have a potential to impact the oversupply caused by Johnson & Johnson and Janssen that began in '96, and actions like these are part of what is helping begin to abate the crisis in Oklahoma.
And when was the first time, Ms. White, that the healthcare authority recognized the potential for an action like this to address the amount of prescribing of hydrocodone in the state of Oklahoma?
Objection, Your Honor, that's calling for her to speculate on the healthcare department.
She can tell me if she doesn't know.
Overruled.
I don't know when they recognized, I think was what you asked me. When did they recognize? I don't know.
So you didn't look into when the healthcare authority recognized that the imposition of a quantity limit for hydrocodone prescriptions could impact the amount of prescribing of hydrocodone in the state of Oklahoma?
I did not look into when, an attempt to figure out when healthcare authority recognized, no.
But you do know, sitting here today, after looking at all of the documents that we've looked at over the last 2 days, that the Bureau of Narcotics, the Healthcare Authority, Drug Utilization Review Board, and others throughout the state of Oklahoma recognized that hydrocodone was an issue in the state of Oklahoma, even going back as far as 2001, don't you?
I believe that what was occurring in Oklahoma in 2001 was a host of intense marketing by Johnson & Johnson and Janssen, pushing and pushing and pushing for doctors to prescribe more opioids, while it appears that we have some of the state agencies stepping up to try to say, this is a problem, but there's no way we could win a tug of war when you drop $30 million into that, and that doesn't include your sales force. So if what you're trying to say to me with this yesterday and today is that somehow the state's fault, that when Johnson & Johnson and Janssen were shooting bullets at the state of Oklahoma, that we didn't invest enough or act fast enough to buy Oklahomans enough bulletproof vests, or when you were dropping bombs on the state of Oklahoma, that we didn't work fast enough or hard enough to build bomb shelters to save people's lives, I find that offensive and I completely disagree with it.
I'm going to move to strike the answer non-responsive to my question, which was simply based on what we've looked at over the last 2 days, Ms. White. Do you agree that the Bureau of Narcotics, the Healthcare Authority, the Drug Utilization Review Board, and others within state government in Oklahoma recognize that hydrocodone was a problem?
May I respond to his
Yes.
motion to strike it? She did answer the question, and she explained it, and it was appropriate. He just doesn't like it.
She didn't give an answer, Your Honor. I'm sure she'll have an opportunity to share all of her theories
I
extensively.
overrule the objection.
So, Ms. White, because I didn't hear an answer there to my question, let me ask it again. Do you agree?
Pardon, he didn't get to ask it again.
I didn't get an answer, Your Honor.
Mr. Brody, you may ask again.
Thank you. Do you agree, Ms. White, that the Drug Utilization Review Board, the Healthcare Authority, the Bureau of Narcotics, and others within the government of the state of Oklahoma recognized, going back to 2001, that hydrocodone prescribing was a problem in Oklahoma.
You're asking me if I believe they recognized it going back to 2001? The DUR board?
Based on all of the documents that we've reviewed, all of the reports that we have looked at, all of the materials provided to the Drug Utilization Review Board, all of the drug threat assessment reports of the Bureau of Narcotics, all of the materials, years worth of materials that we have looked at over the last 2 days.
I believe that what was happening in 2001 in Oklahoma, and I believe I've testified to this already, but let me make it perfectly clear again. I believe that in 2001, the vast majority of Oklahoma, well, I shouldn't say it that way, let me say it a little bit differently. I believe a significant number of Oklahoma physicians, the healthcare community, law enforcement, medical advisory boards, the DUR board, was being pushed and marketed and misled, and had been since 1996, about these opioids. And do I believe that there were people in the state of Oklahoma trying to push back against this force and trying to help educate about what we were beginning to see? I believe that there were a few, and I believe that there is no way in a David and Goliath scenario like that, when sitting in this meeting, these DUR meetings that you're specifically asking me about, and you're showing me these packets of materials where Johnson & Johnson's lobbyists, who were good at their jobs, because I actually knew them, who were good at their jobs, were in people's ear all the time, talking about undertreated pain and people suffering, and all of the misleading and false statements that you led. Yes, I believe there were people in Oklahoma who were trying to educate people about what was really going on, and we didn't have a stand a chance with what Johnson & Johnson and Janssen were doing. And we still are at the point where we have not been able to abate this crisis and reverse what has been done by Johnson & Johnson and Janssen since 1996, but we are making progress. We're going to keep fighting, but we have a long way to go.
Ms. White, have you listened to the recordings of the Drug Utilization Review Board meetings that exist at the Healthcare Authority?
I don't believe I've listened to a recording of the DUR board.
Have you conducted a review of the minutes of those meetings over the years?
Some of the minutes we've looked at today, I don't remember if I've looked at minutes at other times or not.
And the minutes that we have looked at today and yesterday, and I want to come back to my question because I think it's a pretty simple one, reflect an awareness first on the part of that board, as well as other agencies throughout the state of Oklahoma, that hydrocodone prescribing was a problem in the state of Oklahoma, correct?
I believe that they show that the minutes reflect that there was information being provided to this board. What the minutes do not reflect is all of the efforts of Johnson & Johnson and Janssen that were happening simultaneously.
And the Bureau of Narcotics reports reflect the same thing, don't they? Or an awareness that hydrocodone prescribing was an issue, don't they?
I believe that the Bureau of Narcotics reports do talk about that and talk about the huge problem that has been created by the oversupply of prescription drugs, and say that very clearly.
And not only have we seen extensive evidence of the awareness of those issues, we have also, over the last 2 days, looked extensively at actions that were considered by various state agencies and boards, as well as actions that were eventually taken, or in some cases not taken, by various state agencies and boards, correct?
Yes, I believe that we have looked at actions that have been considered, and what I've been trying to explain, and what I hope I will have the opportunity to explain with the influence map, the actions that were considered are pretty heroic given the force that we were up against.
And we've looked at the time that it took to take certain actions.
It takes a long time to re-educate people after 20 years of misinformation. That's exactly what you heard Mr. Stone testify to. That is
Your Honor, that's
correct.
completely non-responsive to my question, and I'm going to move to strike it.
He was responsive. Absolutely was responsive.
I'll move to strike.
Thank you. We have looked at the time that it took for state boards and agencies to take or not take action based on recommendations that were presented to them, haven't we?
You've looked at a DUR board repeatedly, which is not a body able to implement policies, as we've talked about. It is a voluntary advisory board without the authority to affect policies. And what we've seen is that there was information provided to them in their packets, and that there were lobbyists from Johnson & Johnson at almost every single meeting. We have seen that.
I'm sorry. At meetings, the minutes of which you have not reviewed and the recordings for which you have not listened.
Nor did I get to sit in on every conversation that those lobbyists had with DUR board members before and after those meetings.
And nor did you have the opportunity to sit in and view Mr. Ponder's deposition when it was played in court, did you?
I was not here when Mr. Ponder's deposition was played, no.
And while you may belittle the significance of the DUR board, we also looked at actions taken or not taken by the healthcare authority, didn't we?
So you said two.
If we've already looked at it, why is he asking again? It's repetitious, argumentative, and ask and answer.
It's a simple question, Your Honor. If it wasn't so hard to get an answer, we'd be close to wrapped up.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I believe it's repetitive.
Let's run through the various agencies that we have and boards that we have talked about, okay?
Objection.
Will you do that with me? I just want to run a list here, and then, Your Honor, I'm going to have about 2 questions, and we're going to be done.
Pardon me, he said, if I heard right, let's run through what we've already talked about. And I object, it's ask and answer.
Your Honor, she has suggested that the DUR board is an organization of no significance. This is a natural follow-up question to that. It's a simple line of questions, and then we're going to be done.
Overruled.
So we didn't just look at the DUR board, we looked at the history of actions taken by the healthcare authority on quantity limits, edits, formulary status, right?
So that was a long statement. I disagree with the fact that I am belittling the DUR board. I do not believe I said anything to that effect. What I said is the DUR board is a board that is a voluntary board that has no authority to actually implement state policy. I'm just giving you a factual statement. I disagree with the way you interpreted that, but yes, we did look at things from the DUR board.
My question was about the healthcare authority, and I asked you whether we looked at actions taken, actions not taken by the healthcare authority, including formulary placement, prior authorization, quantity limits, step edits. You recall all of that, right?
I remember you showing me that in the DUR packets, yes.
We looked at actions taken, when they were taken by the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics, including actions with respect to the PMP.
We did look at some actions related to the PMP.
We looked at actions taken by the Medical Licensing Board with respect to various doctors who were operating pill mills or engaging in improper prescribing, didn't we?
We did look at some of those.
And after looking at all of that and looking at this history going back to 1990, Ms. White, would you agree that the state of Oklahoma has some responsibility for the opioid crisis?
Absolutely not. I find it incredibly offensive that what you would stand here and suggest is that as Johnson & Johnson and Janssen unleashed a series of bombs, as I have described to you already, across the United States of America that landed squarely in Oklahoma, that killed over 6,000 Oklahomans, without you telling us that you were going to do this, without you still accepting any responsibility today, that as we have worked, as hard as we have worked, and we are the only reason that lives are being saved in the state, that what you say to us is, you didn't build bomb shelters fast enough, you didn't purchase enough bulletproof vests, you couldn't run from us fast enough. And no, I do not agree with that.
Not even 1%.
Not 1%.
Do you believe that the state of Oklahoma was a cause of the opioid crisis in Oklahoma?
Apparently, I have not been perfectly clear. Johnson & Johnson and Janssen dropping bombs and shooting bullets that were unleashing a sales force across our state, that were misleading doctors, that were providing false information, that used KOLs to create a fifth vital sign of pain and convince people that pain was untreated. That you doing all that and putting $30 million plus your sales force behind us without ever telling us about this, that you would then suggest that we bear responsibility for not running fast enough, for not being able to afford to build enough bomb shelters, for not being able to afford to equip Oklahomans with bulletproof vests to save their lives fast enough, that this responsibility belongs on us. No. This is a mantle that we have picked up, that we've been carrying on our shoulders, that I've been carrying firsthand for 13 years, and it is time you take it back.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. Mr. Witt.
Thank you, Your Honor. Steve, do you need any of that back?
No.
Commissioner, I heard your statement about bombs being dropped. Is that what you call an analogy?
Yes, I use analogies a lot when I try to explain addiction and diseases of the brain and other things.
Well, let's talk about analogies, but let's talk about it in the context that he brought it up. He brought it up in the context, he was asking you if the state of Oklahoma caused the opioid epidemic. So let me just get right to it. They're the ones that sold the opioids, right? Not the state.
They're the ones who push for the sale of opioids, absolutely.
So you've heard the phrase, the cart ahead of the horse, or the horse ahead of the cart. It's got to come in the right order, right?
Yes.
Which came first, the sale of the opioids or trying to clean up the mess after people got addicted and after people died?
The sale of the opioids.
Have you ever, I want to use a different analogy and see if it fits here also. And I'm not calling Janssen & Janssen bank robbers. I'm going to use the analogy of a bank robber. Have you ever heard of a bank robber getting caught and defending himself by saying, "You didn't catch me fast enough"?
I've never heard someone say something quite as unconscionable as that.
Well, does that apply to what he has said for the last day and a half while he's been up here questioning you?
Yes, it does.
Commissioner, I know you're not a lawyer. Do you know what impeachment is? Where you pull out a deposition and you try to impeach somebody by showing they're not telling the truth?
I think I understand it.
Your Honor, can I approach?
Yes, you may.
You remember he showed you this email from Carrie Wade? You remember that?
Yes, sir.
And if I recall correctly, I think you said you'd never seen that before.
That's true.
And he asked you for an explanation of it. You gave it to him, right?
Yes. Yes.
Then he pulls out somebody else's deposition, Burl Beasley, and he shows you on page 469 in an attempt to impeach you and say you didn't tell the truth, that on page 469, line 3, he says that the state isn't required to accept supplemental rebates. Does that impeach anything you said?
No, I said I didn't know.
Okay. Well, you've been on the stand now I guess about 2 days. Several different times you asked for Mr. Brody to show you the influence map. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
And he didn't want to show it to you while you were trying to answer those questions. So would you like me to show it to you now?
I would.
Your Honor, can I approach?
Yes, you may.
Well, let's just show it now. Do you remember the questions that he was asking you?
Yes.
And do you remember why you wanted to show him the influence map and try and answer those questions?
Yes.
Your Honor, can she approach the influence map and answer the questions that she was asked previously with the influence map now?
Yes.
Tell the judge, please, what you were trying to say in answer to those earlier questions when you didn't have the influence map in front of you.
There's several things I would like to show you, and then I would also like to show another page from this exact document simultaneously, if I can do that.
Just to be clear, what number is this map?
Pardon me? 1161, Your Honor.
States 1161.
Yes.
This is page 10, and I would like to show page 3 on this screen at the same time.
Okay. Have you got up there what you need to see?
I believe so.
Okay, go ahead.
So what this says is that this is a multidisciplinary partnership influencers map. And what I was trying to explain is that Johnson & Johnson and Janssen, who created this entire document and these pages that we're going to look at, their goal was to influence everyone on this map to end up prescribing more Nucynta, more opioids. This is during 2009, because remember, this product wasn't released until the height of the opioid crisis, when we already had an oversupply in the state of Oklahoma. And what they wanted to do was influence state medical pharmacy boards, boards like the DUR. They wanted to influence state law enforcement, like OBN, like the Attorney General's office. They wanted to influence state legislators. They wanted to influence HHS. They wanted to influence the DEA. They wanted to influence a host of people. And what they mean by this specifically is this line right here. In their advocacy program led by Influence, they want to focus, engage a multidisciplinary group of partners focused on optimizing the benefits of prescription opioids for pain management, minimizing their risks, including abuse and diversion. This is exactly the premise of what I've been trying to describe, and he would not let me show it.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
All right.
First SPIF SIG grant was raising the issue of prescription drugs, and in 2011 is when the data was released from the health department that overdose deaths in our state had overtaken car crashes.
Well, I want to talk about something here to address what Mr. Brody's been saying for the last day or so. So there's a lot of employees in the state of Oklahoma, right?
Yes.
You can't just get them all convinced that our house is on fire instantly, can you?
That's correct, not after they've been misled.
But if we were talking about your own house, let's say where you live, and it's on fire, it's pretty easy just for one family to say, hey, our house is on fire, we've got to put out the fire. That happens pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yes.
But what Mr. Brody's done for the last day is pick and choose various individuals and various boards and say they're noticing a problem with opioids, right?
Yes.
Does that mean simultaneously every employee of the state through osmosis gets that knowledge and believes it instantly?
No.
Does that mean everybody in the state of Oklahoma simultaneously and instantly changes their mind about the things that they've been told for over 20 years by Johnson & Johnson in their $30 million a year marketing program?
No.
Does that even make sense to you?
No, it makes no sense to me.
If it was that easy to change everybody's mind, do you think you would have already done it by now?
Absolutely. And I continue to work every single day on this issue, and I continue to talk to people every single day who don't understand still what has happened. They still don't understand the danger of opioids. They still don't understand and believe these are necessary for types of pain that they were never designed to be used for.
By the way, Johnson & Johnson and Janssen are still defending this lawsuit vigorously and denying any responsibility, saying they did nothing wrong. They haven't changed their mind either, have they?
Your Honor, I think that violates motion on litigation conduct.
I'm not talking about litigation conduct. I'm talking about in this courtroom in front of you, Judge, they denied liability in their opening statement.
I deny.
They still haven't changed their mind either.
No, they have testified they are 0% responsible for this opioid crisis.
And you are the corporate representative for the state. The state has a lot of people, but you're here today representing the state of Oklahoma.
That's
right?
correct.
Now, a party to a lawsuit can admit liability, can't they? They can say that, you know what, you've convinced me. I think we did something wrong. Let's try to fix it.
Your Honor, is he asking for a legal opinion about what party can and cannot do during a lawsuit?
Not a legal opinion, a corporate representative opinion.
I'll sustain the objection for calling for a legal opinion.
Well, let me ask it a different way. If you do something wrong, Commissioner, is the right thing to do to say, okay, we made a mistake, now let's see if we can fix it?
Yes, no matter how hard it is the right thing to do.
Being honest about what you do is very important, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, let's go to the cross-examination Mr. Brody's had for the last day, and let's put it in context, the questions I asked you in a much shorter time period. Commissioner White, let me ask you this. Did any of his cross-examination, any of the points that he's made to you today as the corporate representative for the state of Oklahoma in this lawsuit, did it change any of your opinions you gave the court when you started your testimony?
No.
Did it change your opinion about their false marketing?
No.
Did it change your opinion about the causation of the opioid epidemic you've been fighting since you began being the commissioner?
No.
Did it change your opinion about the abatement plan and it being reasonable and necessary to end this epidemic?
Absolutely not.
All right. Now, can we put up the Center for Disease Control chart again? Mike, can you put that up? The CDC? The 3 lines. What number is it, Randy? 906, Your Honor. May we put that up? It's already in evidence. So, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
He's asked you your opinion, and I just want to make sure. You've talked about dropping bombs. That's an analogy. But opioids, in the analogy, those are the bombs, right?
The bombs are what they did to promote those opioids and the opioids.
All right. Now, you heard Dr. Portwright's testimony at the beginning of the trial. I think he's the second witness.
Yes, I did.
You heard him testify for 80 years. Since the 1920s, we didn't have an opioid epidemic. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
So we had basically a flat line for 80 years, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden, it goes up. You remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
And you remember he testified, we had people that did drugs before 1996, going back into the early 1900s.
Yes, we did.
We had unscrupulous, some, fortunately not very many, but we had some unscrupulous doctors. You heard him tell about that?
I did.
We had opioids too.
Yes, we did.
They've been here for,
I'm letting it go, but it's a lot of leading
I'll rephrase.
Sustained.
Did we have opioids before 1996?
Yes, we did.
Did we have all the potential ingredients for an opioid epidemic prior to 96?
We didn't have one thing. There was one ingredient missing that caused the opioid epidemic, but we had every other ingredient.
Okay. And put up the Oklahoma 5 version of this, Mike, if you don't mind. We've seen this chart before. If you were wrong about causation, why did the numbers go down when you began working to cut back prescribing?
So let me explain. The one ingredient we were missing prior to 1996 was aggressive, well-funded marketing by Johnson & Johnson and Janssen to increase the sales of opioids in the United States. That started, this went up, deaths went up, all the other negative consequences we were talking about went up. And then the state of Oklahoma was left to scramble and try to figure out how to fight. And at first, and as I testified, when this started going up, I didn't understand the cause of everything I understand today. I did not understand all of the things Johnson & Johnson and Janssen did. There still may be more I don't know, but I know a lot more after preparing for this trial and sitting through this trial. And so we started trying to combat the thing that changed, which was their oversale and oversupply. And the reason that line started going down is because of the abatement efforts, because of the efforts we took through naloxone. Not because people weren't overdosing, but we were able to give them nasal spray to save their life until they could get to the emergency room. Not because people weren't struggling with opioid use disorder, but because we have been scrambling to get more medication-assisted treatment to this state. All of these things we are doing, which is helping drive this down.
Can you put up the sales rep visit chart tonight? It's already in evidence, Your Honor. I don't remember the number. Do you remember seeing this?
Yes, I do.
So why do opioids even need to be marketed? Why couldn't the doctors do what they did before 96, and if they needed it, just order it and use it?
That's a great question.
Well, let's look at it from the other direction, okay? If opioids are as useful as they're saying in that chart I showed you just a moment ago, where they said we want to maximize the benefits of opioids, if they're so great, why did they need to have 20,933 sales visits in 2005? Why did they need to have these here on the board? 16,000, 18,000, 18,000 from 2009 through 2013, the height of the epidemic. Why did they need that?
They didn't need to do that.
And indeed, they got rid of their sales force after, it looks like 2013. Are we doing okay on opioids after they quit using all these sales reps?
We still have far too many opioids and an oversupply in the state of Oklahoma.
Is there any doubt in your mind, based on the evidence that you're looking at right here, as to what caused the opioid epidemic?
No, there is no doubt in my mind.
Okay. So let's talk about pill mills. You remember Mr. Brody showed you a bunch over and over, year by year, the DUR charts.
Yeah,
DUR records, I'm sorry.
yes.
Let's talk about the first one, I think the first doctor. It's Dr. Myers. Do you remember a Dr. Ronald Myers that he showed you?
I remember that he showed me that.
Your Honor, can we put up, I'm not sure this one's in. Is 1348 in? It is, okay. May we publish state 1348?
Yes.
They tell me it's already in evidence.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, can you see that, Commissioner?
Yes.
Is this one of the ones he put up? No, I'm not sure this is one of the ones he put up, but it's the same doctor, isn't it? Ronald
is.
Myers. Do you recognize that?
It is.
Do you see where it says, quote, Ronald Myers, MD, is a huge, and those are capitalized. We didn't add that. You see that?
I do.
Ronald Myers, MD, is a huge Nucynta target for me. Now, this is a sales rep writing this, right?
Correct.
He is an FP doc in Roland that does pain management. Do you see where I read that from?
I do.
Do you see where it says, I believe it would be good business decision to bring in a speaker for lunch or dinner if budget dollars allow and if the docs are interested. It says interest. I think it means interested. You see where I'm reading?
I do.
Let's go to the next page.
The one thing I'd like to mention about this is I wish I had remembered this when he asked me if I knew if Dr. Myers ever prescribed Nucynta. Because it says he used it quite a bit.
Well, so I guess here's what I'm trying to get at. Let me just ask you this. Did you hear Mr. Brody criticize Oklahoma's DUR board for not stopping this doctor earlier? Is that the point you got from that?
That is what I believe he was implying.
But at the same
Did
time,
you are born and others?
but at exactly the same time, don't we see Johnson & Johnson, Janssen sales reps pushing to sell more opioids?
Yes.
Do you see something inconsistent with that? Where on the one hand, they're saying, why didn't you stop us? And on the other hand, they're saying, sell more opioids. This is a huge target.
Yes.
Let's go to J218, which is Dr. Myers. May we publish that, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Do you remember Mr. Brody asking you questions about an investigation by the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics into a Dr. Myers?
Yes.
And do you remember him pointing out that the Bureau of Narcotics found that Dr. Myers' office looked like a pill mill?
Yes.
And he also pointed out that Dr. Myers had been investigated before by the DEA in 2006. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you know how many times Johnson & Johnson called on Dr. Myers trying to promote its opioids during the same period of time? I think you heard the answer
I think he
from
told
Mr.
me it
Brody.
was 50.
Yes, that is what he told us today, it was 50. I think we actually have a graph on that, Your Honor. Can we put this up talking about these number of visits to Dr. Myers by Johnson & Johnson sales reps? Yeah. I think we do. Do we have a copy of that? Looks like we do not have a copy. Okay, hold on. I think Randa has a copy. Just one moment, Your Honor, if we may.
Yes.
Can you give that to him, Randa? Thank you.
Sometime if we can take a break soon. It's okay if we can't.
Actually, this is your document that I'm just adding up the numbers on. Okay. Can you see from there how many times Johnson & Johnson visited?
This is not what I was given. But that's fine. I was given something else.
Okay.
I thought he was saying something else.
That's all right. No objection to showing.
Okay. I think it gives the same numbers. You can count, make sure my math's all right, but it's supposed to add up to 50. Can you see that, Commissioner?
Yes, I can.
And does that show, the red J&J represents a sales rep visit from 2009 to 2011. Again, I ask you, does it seem fair to argue that you should have stopped us earlier when we're vigorously, with 50 visits, trying to sell more opioids to the very doctor they're criticizing?
No, it's not right.
And by the way, all these doctors existed before their sales reps' visits. They increased prescribing after their sales rep visits, right?
Yes.
So, by the way, I want to turn one of his questions around. He asked if the state ever called Johnson & Johnson. Did Johnson & Johnson ever report to the state information they learned in these 50 visits with the very doctor they're criticizing?
No.
You see a problem with them criticizing the state when they didn't do anything either?
It seems inconsistent to say the least.
Well, do you remember, I'll tell you what, I think we have a
Mr.
clue
Whitten,
to
I'm
Dr.
going to interrupt you. I'd like to take a break.
You bet.
We will break until 3:20, and then we'll resume at 3:20.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please have a seat. I'm so sorry. Here is a copy.
Yes.
This is my last graphic. I'm assuming we can mark these as court exhibits after the witnesses are there.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. May I proceed?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Commissioner, do you remember the questions you were being asked by Mr. Brody about reporting things?
Yes?
Okay, well, I want to ask you some further questions about whether J&J did some reporting of their own. The thousands of sales rep visits shown on Exhibit 10, do you know whether they reported all those to the state?
They did not.
Now, there's been testimony in this case from several experts, but I'll name a few, Rinzai Stone, Dr. Klodny, Dr. Beeman. Do you know whether Johnson & Johnson or Janssen reported any of the misleading marketing information that they were giving doctors to the state of Oklahoma?
Mr. Whitten?
Yes, let me respond, Your Honor. I'm just wondering if any of the alleged, my experts said it was false and misleading marketing. I just want to know if they reported to the state of Oklahoma what they were doing. I think that's a fair question.
I don't think the question, excuse me, is specific enough, Your Honor, for lack of better question.
I overrule the objection.
Did they report any of the false and misleading marketing that's been testified in this case so far to the state of Oklahoma contemporaneously when they were saying these things to doctors?
No, they did not.
Did they report to the state of Oklahoma contemporaneously when it was happening some of the improper studies that they were relying on to say that addiction with opioids was extremely rare, or 1% of the time?
No, they did not.
Did they report their $30 million a year marketing plans to the state of Oklahoma?
No, they did not.
Did they report this influence map and give it to the state of Oklahoma and tell them, by the way, we're trying to influence each one of these agencies or boards in the state that have been talked about thus far?
Not until our Attorney General filed a lawsuit and they were forced to produce it.
Did they, for example, go to the DUR board each time there was a meeting and tell them, hey, in fairness, we've been targeting you guys for years and we've been saying things to exaggerate the benefits of opioids and at the same time minimize the risk of opioids? Did they tell them that?
Two objections, Your Honor. One is leading, and two, she testified that she didn't look at the DUR board minutes, so I don't think there was a foundation for her to answer that question.
It's sort of an if you know, Your Honor.
I'll sustain the objection.
Did you hear in the whole time you've been battling this problem at the state of Oklahoma of any reporting to the state at all, of any of the things you have testified to the judge that they did to cause this epidemic? Have you heard them self-report to the state contemporaneously when they were doing them? Any of these things that
No.
caused the epidemic?
No,
Would that have been helpful if they had done that on a timely basis, Commissioner?
absolutely.
So let's continue with our questions we had before the break. I want to talk about the doctors that Mr. Brody talked about. I think we've made it up now to Dr. Howell. Do you remember he talked about the DUR board talking about a Mr. Howell, or Dr. Howell?
Yes, I do.
I think that was Defendant's Exhibit 3921. May we publish that, Your Honor?
Which one do you want?
It's the one you used, I think, which was A.
Okay, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. You remember Mr. Brody asking you about this Dr. Howell?
Yes, I do.
And do you remember he talked about Dr. Myers and Howell? Do they work at the same clinic, by the way?
Yes, I believe they do.
Okay, and I think we're going to look at a page 5 of this document. And I think we're going to highlight part of, Mike, we actually need to go to the quote. Prior to April 2010, excuse me, Your Honor. Do you have a quote on that? Okay. Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry. Okay, can you see the part we have highlighted there, Commissioner?
I could.
Can you read that?
Absolutely. Prior to April 2010, Dr. Howell had minimal controlled substance exposure. After this point, his monthly controlled substance percentage increased over 60%, issuing 254 total prescriptions.
Do you see the chart below that?
Yes, I do.
So he wasn't doing much prescribing before April of 2010, but he started prescribing. What happened time-wise about the time his prescribing went up?
He was visited by Janssen and Johnson sales reps.
Did Mr. Brody tell you in his questioning how many times Johnson & Johnson sales reps visited Dr. Howell during this period of time when his prescribing went up?
I don't believe so.
I think we have the call notes. Your Honor, I think this is already in. Let me double check it. State 2481 through 2496 are the Howell call notes. Those are already in, are they not? Yes, they tell me those are already in, Your Honor. May we publish those?
Bless you.
Thank you. Yes, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you see on those call notes, if you can read that from here, when the first J&J visit was made by a sales rep to Dr. Howell?
March 3rd of 2010.
And isn't that the exact same month that his prescribing of opioids took off?
Yes, and he was visited twice in March, it looks like, at least.
Your Honor, we have a graphic. I think I gave you a copy and I gave Steve a copy. This is one we've made to rebut this line of questions to show the number of sale calls, sorry. May we display this?
No objection.
Thank you. Do you see what happened with the sales visits relative to the prescribing of opioids by this doctor?
Yes, I do. He was visited 27 times in 2010 and 2011.
Does that look like a coincidence that a doctor who didn't prescribe opioids and then he gets visited this many times and then the prescribing goes up? Does that look like a coincidence?
No, it does not.
Let's move on to a physician assistant by the name of, I don't know how you pronounce this, Your Honor, Tougas. I'll just say Togus because I'm not sure. Do you recall Mr. Brody asking you about this PA who owned the Roland Clinic?
Yes, I do.
I think it's Mr. Bernard Togus. Your Honor, can we put up J&J 595.0019, paragraph B? I think that's already in evidence. It's not in that packet? I think it's already in evidence. It's your exhibit. Okay, well, you marked it yesterday. Okay, thanks, Steve. May we display that exhibit, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right. Did Mr. Brody tell you that PA Togus gave an Ultram prescription to an undercover agent? You remember that?
He did not tell me that he was given Ultram.
And Ultram is a product that's made by who?
Johnson & Johnson and Janssen.
In fact, who invented this product?
It was invented by Janssen.
Let's move to the call notes on this PA. These are State's Exhibit 2481 through 2496. Now, can you see those from where you're sitting, Commissioner?
Yes, I can.
And can you tell how many times Johnson & Johnson visited the PA, Mr. Togus?
I believe it says there 35, but I don't know if we have to take out the first two lines, so it's somewhere between 33 and 35 times.
Okay. And I think we actually have a graphic on that one? No? Okay. We'll just have to use the call notes then. Again, do you think that's a coincidence that his prescribing went up and he's getting investigated after he's getting all these sales calls from the very people that are criticizing the state for not stopping this man.
No, this is exactly what I've been saying during my testimony. We had, from 1920s to 1996, we had opioids, we had people who struggled with addiction, we had doctors, we had, as you heard in Dr. Courtwright's testimony, we had some doctors that were that were overprescribing or unscrupulous, although not very many, but something changed in 1996 to change that nearly 100 years of flat. And what changed was the marketing push, sales reps calls, and other bombs that were released on this state, and that's exactly the example.
Well, just using your common sense, this is not an expert witness, this is a common sense standpoint. If you're going to hire sales reps and pay them to sell things, don't you expect for the sales to go up?
Yes, that's the reason you do it.
And indeed, that's what these records have shown throughout this trial that you've witnessed.
Absolutely. Mr. Stone testified multiple times that that was the point. We saw documents about the investment and the projected yield. Absolutely.
Do you know why Johnson & Johnson would argue against the very money they're spending and marketing they're spending money for? Normally people brag about things they're trying to do. Why would they try to minimize their efforts to sell opioids?
I think they knew these products were dangerous, and I think currently they're trying to minimize what they've done.
Now, there was some questions Mr. Brody asked you about when they started selling Johnson & Johnson opioids, but let's talk about unbranded marketing. What is unbranded marketing?
Unbranded marketing is, so let me say it this way. Branded marketing is when you take a name of a drug, like Nucynta, like Duragesic, and you market specifically to sell Nucynta and Duragesic. Unbranded marketing is when you take the type of drug it is, which is an opioid, and you try to basically market opioids in general in hopes that that rising tide will raise your boat as well.
Did Johnson & Johnson and Janssen engage not only in selling their own products, but in unbranded marketing of opioids as well?
Absolutely. Not only did they engage in unbranded marketing with the idea that as opioid sales rose, their particular opioid product sales would rise, but they also provided the active pharmaceutical ingredient in the majority of opioids sold in the state of Oklahoma, and so that was a financial benefit for them as well for more opioids to be sold.
So they made money when they sold their own opioid, right?
Yes.
And they made money when other companies, like say, for example, Purdue and Teva, sold their opioids because they provided the active pharmaceutical ingredient to them.
Absolutely.
So,
I know Mr. Whitten can examine his own witness without leaving, and I just request that you do something.
Thank you.
I'll rephrase it.
Thank you.
What happened with their unbranded marketing and their providing the active pharmaceutical ingredient? What happened? Tell the court.
So what happened with their unbranded marketing is that the sales of opioids in the state of Oklahoma rose rapidly and significantly. If you look at the chart that we've looked at multiple times, it shows that they provided the majority of the product for a host, oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine, morphine, all of which sales increased that they profited from, as well as the sale of their own products.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
I think this is already in evidence, states 900, the consensus statement.
Thank you.
Do you remember seeing that consensus statement, Commissioner?
Yes, I do.
And do you remember hearing Dr. Kolodny's testimony about the consensus statement?
Yes, I do.
And this was in 1997. Was that a critical point in time?
Absolutely. It is the beginning of the rise of the opioid crisis and the rise of the sale of opioids.
And do you recall the testimony from Dr. Kolodny about Johnson & Johnson funding these efforts?
Yes, I
like the
do.
consensus statement.
Yes, I do.
Did they fund the APS and the AAPM efforts at trying to sell more opioids? I'll rephrase. Were you in the courtroom when you heard that testimony from Dr. Kolodny?
Yes, I was.
And Johnson & Johnson's lawyer, Robert Angarola, what did he have to do with this?
He is one of the authors of the consensus document that told people multiple things, including that these were non-addictive medications or low addiction potential.
Was the consensus statement widely disseminated?
Absolutely, it was widely disseminated. The American Academy for Pain Medicine and the American Pain Society were one of those organizations that were looked at and believed to be knowledgeable without people realizing the funding that was put behind them or what they were being used for.
There were a couple of other doctors that talked about, I think, this morning, Dr. Dennis Roberts. Do you recall that name being talked about?
I believe so.
I think we have a demonstrative on his sales calls we'd like to use too, Your Honor. May we do that?
No objection to this one, Your Honor. Roberts, is it this provision?
Yeah.
No objection.
Go ahead and publish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mike, can you put that up? Now, I've shown you that before with the sales visits for this. This is another doctor that Mr. Brody is criticizing the state for not stopping, and yet look what the sales reps are doing with Dr. Roberts. What are they doing, Commissioner?
It appears that they visited Dr. Roberts 126 times between 1999 and 2012.
Is it inconsistent on the one hand for the seller and marketer of opioids to say to the state, why didn't you stop me earlier? At the same time, them visiting these doctors, trying to do the two things you pointed out on that exhibit, trying to tell them that opioids were needed and at the same time they weren't very addictive.
Absolutely. Going back to your early analogy of a house on fire, it's like them setting a house on fire and then turning around and asking the fire department, why didn't you put that fire out fast enough?
Does that make sense to you?
No.
Do you think that's fair?
No, and they're pouring kerosene on this fire the whole time they're asking that question.
Let's talk about the next doctor they brought up, Dr. Harvey Jenkins. Do you remember that gentleman?
Yes, I do.
And we have a demonstrative on him, Your Honor, if we may.
No objection to display.
You may publish.
Thank you. And I've shown you this one, Commissioner.
Yes.
And this is another doctor that they're criticizing and saying, why didn't you stop him? And yet, how many sales visits do we have from Johnson & Johnson sales reps?
80 sales visits by Johnson & Johnson sales rep between 2009 and 2014.
And you said you'd heard of this doctor before. Is this the doctor that actually has been prosecuted and had 5 of his patients die?
Yes.
And were those sales visits from Johnson & Johnson during the very same time period that they're criticizing the state for not stopping this doctor from writing so many prescriptions?
Absolutely.
Let's go back for just a minute to the Roland Clinic. They tell me, I don't think we could find a demonstrative. They tell me we do have one on that. May I display the Roland Clinic demonstrative too, Your Honor, on sales rep visits?
No objection, Your Honor.
You may display it.
Mike, can you put that one up? Do you remember this Roland Clinic? I'm sorry, the Wellness Clinic in Roland?
Yes, I do.
You remember those questions there?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember Mr. Brody asking you about the doctors there, Tugas, Myers, Howell,
Yes, I do.
and blaming the state for not stopping these doctors from writing so many prescriptions of opioids?
Yes, I do.
And yet, what happened here with Johnson & Johnson sales reps?
It looks like they visited Tugas 37 times, Myers 50 times, Howell 30 times, Friedel 15 times. And so doing the math really quickly in my head, I believe that would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 132 visits, 130.
You said you were really good at math. We're testing you right now.
I am, but I am always allowed to use a calculator.
All right. Does that seem inconsistent that on the one hand, the seller and marketer of opioids would criticize the state of Oklahoma for not stopping these people from writing so many opioid prescriptions, while at the same time they're visiting them triple-digit times?
It's worse than inconsistent. What Mr. Bodie suggested to me was that why didn't the state of Oklahoma tell Johnson & Johnson about an undercover investigation at the same time there were over 130 visits by Johnson & Johnson to this clinic pushing their opioid product that they didn't bother to tell the state of Oklahoma about, that the state of Oklahoma was unaware of during their undercover investigation. It's insulting.
Do you remember he talked about a Dr. Mickey Tyrell?
Yes, I do.
And let's talk about that. States Exhibit 4373, I think, are the call notes. May we display that for Dr. Tyrell?
Yes.
Thank you, Ron. Mike, can you put those up?
Okay, we've shown you these call notes.
Yes, I
Remember
see.
seeing these?
I do.
Does it strike you as inconsistent that they would criticize the state of Oklahoma for not stopping this doctor from selling so many opioids at the same time as they're making sales rep calls to the doctor trying to sell the very same opioids? Now they're complaining about the state not stopping.
Absolutely, and as you can see, this was a full detail on Nucynta, their product.
Well, that was my next question.
I'm sorry.
Is Nucynta mentioned in this document?
Yes, it is.
And read what it says about Nucynta there.
Full detail on Nucynta. You want me to keep reading?
Yeah.
Full detail on Nucynta. Said he liked it and sounded good. Only objection was that it was pregnant cat seed. I'm not sure what that means. And not recommended for nursing mothers. And obviously he wanted mothers to nurse after they had had their babies. Main reason he would not use it for post-op C-sections. I said if he had a mother who he knew would not nurse, then use for her. He said he would. Asked if he had in other patients with acute pain, and he said on occasion has patients with broken arms, etc., who come into the ER and are follow-up, maybe? Asked about hospital form, and then after discussion said if it's not they write exception basis, if it's not that they write exception basis, and get from Osborne. I did go to Osborne and Ben and said they would order. UER all, the Rizolt stuff was sitting there. So I said they'd obviously seen the rep. They both said they weren't even sure what it was. Told them and why they should continue to use prescription UER. Said they would.
Why they should continue to use it?
Yes,
Does that strike you as inconsistent?
absolutely.
Let's look at States Exhibit 0037. I think this is already in evidence. Let me check, Your Honor. Is that right? Yes.
Give a copy for me.
Yep. You did. Have you seen this before?
I believe so.
This is the media response document for Duragesic. This is Johnson & Johnson's media response kit. Does this document talk about opioids in a general fashion?
Yes, it does.
Do we need to make that bigger for you to read it? Read what it
Thank you.
says for the record about where it talks about opioids in general, please.
Chronic pain
Your
patient.
Honor, I'm going to object to be on stuff in the process.
It's responding to their criticisms about sales reps not being stopped. It is specifically in response to a number of the questions that he asked. It also won't, I don't plan on spending very much time on it, Your Honor. It's also unbranded. It gets into the issue that he brought up about they didn't do unbranded marketing when they did.
Your Honor, it's a media response document. It's not even an external marketing document. It's not, it's well outside the scope of the process.
It appears to show that they're telling their people to brag about opioids in general, which is unbranded marketing, something that he
I
said they didn't
overrule
do.
the objection.
Commissioner, can you see the part where it talks about unbranded marketing and opioids in general? And if so, will you read that?
Chronic pain patients treated appropriately with opioids by physicians rarely become addicted. In fact, according to a press release from the American Pain Foundation, the vast majority of people who are given these medicines, opioids, by doctors will not become addicted.
Well, a couple of questions in follow-up. Number one, does that just talk about Duragesic, or does it talk about opioids in general?
Talks about opioids in general.
So if that statement is made to physicians or PAs throughout this state, and they believe that statement, does it encourage opioids in general?
Absolutely.
Does it minimize the risk of opioids in general, not just Duragesic?
Yes, it does, and I believe this goes specifically to what Mr. Bodie had said to me, was that they did not do unbranded marketing in the 1990s.
Well, you beat me to my next question.
Oh, sorry.
That makes that statement false, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it's false. I told him at the time that I thought it was false based on the American Pain Foundation that they funded and the statements that they made.
Does a rising tide actually lift all ships?
It did, unfortunately, for opioid sales in the state of Oklahoma.
And you mentioned the event that happened in 1996 with the launch by Purdue of OxyContin. Who was supplying the active pharmaceutical ingredient to Purdue?
Johnson & Johnson and Janssen.
Let's go talk about the DUR board that he asked you about. I would like at this time, Your Honor, to offer into evidence this one. Pardon me, Your Honor. 2362. And I have a copy for you, Steve. You probably don't want a highlighted copy, Steve, so here's a blank one. Your Honor, at this time, we would offer State's Exhibit 2362, which is a Strategic Customer Group 2003 Business Plan for Janssen, I might add.
No objection, Your Honor.
May I approach and give the court a
Yes.
copy for the record? And witness.
State's Exhibit 2362 will be admitted into the evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Commissioner, look at that on page 0030. And I'm going to ask you to look for a section entitled Key Issues. It's also being displayed on the big board there.
Yes.
Okay. So, didn't Mr. Brody ask you questions and advise that part of Johnson & Johnson's business plan was to minimize restrictions in the state Medicaid programs?
Did you ask me, did he do that? Is that what you said?
Did you hear questions on that topic?
Yes, I did.
And what does that key issue section say on that topic?
2002 was a very challenging year for minimizing restrictions in state Medicaid.
So let's put this into context, shall we? He's asked you questions over and over again about why the state of Oklahoma, the DUR board, didn't take action to stop certain doctors. Do you remember that? Remember
Yes.
those questions? And here it indicates part of their business plan is to minimize restrictions in state Medicaid.
Yes, it goes on to say, lobbying and grassroots efforts aimed at Washington, D.C. and several states were critical to avoiding harmful legislation in 2002, despite what they refer to as a series of threats.
But Mr. Brody didn't tell you about that when he was asking these questions, did he?
He did not.
Did Mr. Brody tell you that one of J&J's strategic objectives was to, quote, influence legislative and lobbyist activities pertaining to Medicaid?
No, he did not.
That's in there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Did Mr. Brody tell you that one of Johnson & Johnson's strategic objectives was to, quote, protect and grow, end quote, its Medicaid sales by hundreds of millions of dollars?
No, he did not.
Is that consistent with the line of questions where he's criticizing the state of Oklahoma for the DUR board not doing something quicker when indeed they're fighting against that?
It is exactly what I was trying to demonstrate, that the DUR board was being lobbied, and at nearly every meeting Johnson & Johnson was present. They had a plan to influence legislative and lobbying activities pertaining to Medicaid.
Well, let's talk about Medicaid for a minute. He showed you a lot of documents about Medicaid. Remember that?
Yes.
But Medicaid is not, that's not the entire nuisance we're talking about, is it?
Not even close.
Well, explain to the court why Medicaid really doesn't cover all the bases that need to be covered when we're talking about an opioid epidemic in Oklahoma.
Medicaid does not cover the entire population in the state of Oklahoma, and in fact, when you look at the actual data about sales of opioid products in the state of Oklahoma, certainly less than 30%, and I actually think it's less than 20%, but certainly less than 30% of opioid sales in Oklahoma were paid for by Medicaid. The vast majority were paid for by other sources. This is just a sliver of the problem.
Well, indeed, what about the prescribing of opioids to Medicaid people? Is it as high in the Medicare population as it is in the rest of the population of cases?
I believe so. I believe, in fact, Medicare typically is a coverage for people who are older, so like older Oklahomans, and that was a population targeted specifically by Johnson & Johnson, and Janssen were elderly Oklahomans.
Will the Sooner Care have a higher percentage of young people, children?
Sooner Care is primarily, if you look at who makes up the population covered by Sooner Care, the majority of that population is children.
Well, we're not supposed to be writing opioids to children as often as to older people, are we?
We are not supposed to be, despite the efforts of Johnson & Johnson and Janssen to create a sprains and strains campaign, as you heard, aimed specifically at youth.
Well, let's keep talking about the DUR board.
It's completely improper to have an expert witness interpret evidence when there's no foundation for the interpretation. Absolutely.
She's been present in the trial where there's been documents talking about marketing to young people.
I overrule the objection.
Thank you. You heard that, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You're aware of it, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Now, Mr. Brody asked you about DUR board meeting minutes. You remember that?
Yes, I
He
do.
talked about the pharma seat not being a voting member of the DUR board. Do you remember those questions?
That's the way he presented it.
But he didn't tell you that before 2006, the pharma appointed member could vote, did he?
No, he did not.
In fact, didn't the pharma seat become non-voting in 2006, and that's after the epidemic had been going about 10 years?
That's correct.
Well, let's talk about Johnson Exhibit 729. That's a DUR board minute. Mr. Brody put up and used this with you. May I display that, Your Honor?
Yes.
Page 71. And on page 71, do you recall him showing you those two charts earlier?
I do.
And you recall that it says OxyContin usage has nearly doubled every year since its release in 1996.
Yes.
And indeed, is that consistent with the state's position in this lawsuit about the rise of the epidemic over the years?
Absolutely.
And let's look at the next page on page 72. Back up one, Mike. Back up to that last page, please. By the way, you see the same slope on those two charts.
Yes, I
From
do.
left to right, it's low in 96. And what does it do is it moves to the right
It begins increasing rapidly.
on both charts.
Yes, it does.
Let's go to the next page, page 72, Mike, please. And you remember seeing this one as well? He showed it to you earlier.
Yes.
But I want to ask you, did he read you the conclusion on that page?
I don't believe so.
We've got it displayed right there. Do you see it says, quote, the usage of OxyContin has nearly doubled each year since 1996. This can be explained by any of the following. Colon. Increased awareness, promotion of drug since introduction into the market. And then there's another bullet point, use of more aggressive pain management strategies. And there's another bullet point, misuse, abuse of the drug. End quote. You see that?
Yes, I do.
What's the date at the bottom of that?
June 29th, 2001.
Now, this is just a couple of years after the 1996 consensus statement that we talked about, right?
I believe it was 1997, but yes.
I'm sorry, if I said six, I didn't mean to. 1997 consensus statement. And that very consensus statement was arguing that non-cancer pain should be aggressively treated. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
And that's exactly what happened in Oklahoma.
Unfortunately, it is.
That's what the records show happened, correct?
Correct.
So let's put up State's Exhibit 0340.0007. Is this already in evidence? They're telling me this is already in evidence, Your Honor. May we use this?
Yes.
And were you aware that Johnson & Johnson gave its highest medal to its employee in Tasmania for creating the mutant poppy that enabled the growth of oxycodone in America?
Objection, let the scope go.
It was covered on cross, the sale of
Overruled.
opioids. Thank you. Were you aware of that?
I learned in preparation and during this trial.
And that Janssen was supplying the very oxycodone that Oklahoma's struggling with to the companies that make opioids as well as their own,
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Now let's go to a new topic. Do you remember him asking you some questions about one of our former attorney generals, Drew Edmondson?
Yes,
Do
I
you
do.
remember that? And I think, let's put up what he showed you. It's, if I may, Your Honor, it's Johnson 1522. It's another DUR board meeting from February
Yes.
2003.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Page 5. And you remember he showed you this document
Yes, I
when he
do.
cross-examined you? And do you see one of the attendees is a man by the name of Jack Vaughn?
I do.
And who is he?
Jack Vaughn was a lobbyist for Johnson & Johnson.
Did you know him?
I did.
And so back in 2003, were you even aware that they started this epidemic in '96 and that it was rising every year? Did you even know it?
I had no idea. I knew Jack Vaughn. I worked with him because I worked with him on trying to talk about prescribing of psychotropic medications, and he never told me what was happening on these products.
He never told you about their marketing efforts.
He did not.
He never told you about their sales reps.
He did not.
He never told you that they were minimizing the risks of addiction of opioid.
He absolutely did not.
He never told you that they were enhancing and building up the benefits of opioids.
No, he did not.
He never told you that they were trying to create an epidemic of untreated pain.
No, he did not.
Let's look at page 11 of this document. Do you remember Mr. Brody asking you about a DUR meeting where an assistant attorney general from the Oklahoma Attorney General's office spoke?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Now that's when General Edmondson was the general at that time. Let's look at the next page, page 12. Do you remember Mr. Brody asking you some questions about the statements made by General Edmondson's assistant attorney general?
Yes, I do.
But here's my question. I want to know if he left out part of that. Did he tell you that the assistant attorney general's main focus in that meeting was, quote, for quote, patients who are terminally ill in regard to effective pain management for patients near the end of their lives?
He absolutely did not.
And wasn't that one of the causes that the Attorney General's wife was pushing, was trying to get palliative end-of-life care to people?
This was an issue that was very important to the Attorney General.
And you are the corporate representative for the state of Oklahoma in this case. Have we taken issue with the use of opioids for palliative end-of-life care?
No, and I think we made that clear from the beginning.
And that's what this Attorney General was mainly focused on in that meeting, right?
Absolutely. That is correct.
And do you see the sentence near the top of this document that talks about OxyContin?
Yes.
Same document, but he didn't read you this.
No, he did
It
not.
says, quote, OxyContin, based on studies and leading organization worldwide, including the American Pain Society, the World Health Organization, is the best option for long-acting pain relief.
Yes.
He didn't tell you about that part.
No, he did not.
And that's demonstrably false, isn't it?
Correct. American Pain Society promulgated a lot of false information.
That's one of the groups that sponsored the consensus statement with Johnson & Johnson in 1997, correct?
And the group that was one of the groups that was paid by Johnson & Johnson.
Would the people at this meeting have any reason at that time, looking back at that time, not having all the documents we have today that have come out in this lawsuit, would they have any reason to disbelieve what these people were saying back then?
No, we did not know then what Johnson & Johnson was up to and what they had done in terms of paying this organization and what their goal was.
And indeed, as being the corporate rep in this case, you are aware that Johnson & Johnson not only attacks addicts, but they also attack the doctors for prescribing.
Objection, Your Honor, there is no foundation, absolutely no foundation for the idea that Johnson & Johnson attacks addicts. I move to strike that.
I will rephrase, I'll get rid of the word attack.
I'll grant the motion.
Johnson & Johnson, one of their defenses in this case is that the addicts get addicted, that it's their fault, and the doctors, it's their fault for making the decision to write these opioids.
Objection, Your Honor, there has been no position taken in this litigation that addiction is the fault of addicts.
I believe it's in their answer.
We have heard it suggested by the state numerous times. that that's what the defense is doing. The defense hasn't done that.
I believe they filed it in their answer, Your Honor. It is clear that's one of their defenses. They're blaming everybody but themselves.
Your Honor, it's a mischaracterization of any position you take.
We'll grant the objection, sustain the objection.
Thank you.
Do you remember when Mr. Brody told you that the state of Oklahoma had failed several different times to enact quantity limits for opioids?
Yes.
Now, was there an opioid epidemic before 1996?
No, there was not.
Did everybody in the state of Oklahoma know there was an opioid epidemic before you learned about it in 2011 or 2012?
No.
Would there be any reason for them to enact some sort of pill limit bills that limit the number of opioids a doctor can prescribe before they knew there was a problem?
No.
Now, if you go down the page here, the Assistant Attorney General addresses a proposed quantity limit being considered by the DUR Board. It says, quote, the Federation of State Medical Boards model guidelines. Do you see where I'm reading from?
I do.
The model guidelines, do you remember Dr. Kolodny's testimony that that's a group that was funded by Johnson & Johnson?
Yes.
Do you remember the book called Responsible Opioid Prescribing being talked about several weeks ago when we started this trial?
Yes.
And that's a book they put out that has false statements about the dangers and the addictive qualities of opioids. You remember that?
Excuse me, yes.
And did you hear Dr. Kolodny testify that over 6,000 copies of that book were distributed here in Oklahoma?
Yes.
So if people on the DUR board had that book and were aware of their positions, how would they know back then?
They would not have known.
How would they know back then that they were false or they were misleading?
Again, I think this is really important to understand the concept of what this influence map was about and what they were doing. This is not just something they were doing when they launched Nucynta at the height of the opioid crisis in 2009. This had been the strategy in multiple marketing, including the business plan we just looked at a few minutes ago from 2003.
Do you remember Mr. Brody showing you some DUR board minutes that discussed an alarming increase in pregnant Sooner Care members being prescribed opioids?
Yes, I do.
I think it's Johnson 1644 at page 24 through 26. Your Honor, can we put this up?
Yes.
Thank you. Mike, can you go to page 24, 26? Do you remember him asking you questions about that?
I do.
Do you remember Mr. Brody asking if you had any evidence of Johnson & Johnson promoting to pregnant women?
Yes, I do.
Now, you do know that Johnson & Johnson sales reps called on specific targets that prescribed Ultram to pregnant women.
Yes, we've seen that evidence in this trial.
You were here when Dr. Kolodny talked about key opinion leaders
Yes.
and how Johnson & Johnson used those KOLs to promote their drugs and the use of opioids generally.
Yes.
And you heard the testimony about KOLs giving speeches and publishing articles.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
And did you hear Ms. Eshelman during her testimony talk about Johnson & Johnson's relationship with some of these KOLs?
Yes, I do.
Let's pull up State's Exhibit, which is already in evidence, 967. Mike, can you pull that up? Now, there's a key opinion leader, KOL, by the name of Passik, P-A-S-S-I-K. Do you recall seeing that name in some of the documents?
Yes, I do. He was their number 2 key opinion leader, I believe.
You see above it is Dr. Russell Portnoy, a doctor who testified in this case by video deposition. He was their main KOL.
Yes.
And Steve Passik, are you aware he was their number 2 KOL?
Yes.
And Mr. Brody didn't show you anything from him on the subject of them marketing to doctors to prescribe to pregnant women, did he?
No, he did not.
But are you aware, by seeing articles, that indeed one of their KOLs actually did promote opioids to pregnant women?
Yes, I am.
Your Honor, may I approach and show her this?
You may.
When I heard this testimony this morning, we took a break.
You have a copy of where it is for show.
Do we have a spare, folks? One moment, please. Yes, we do. Well, you got a copy of everything, Steve, you just have to find it. Thanks a minute. Here you go. Don, I haven't offered it yet. You want me to give you one?
Sure.
And I'll have to tell you what page we're going to look at.
And I ask what the source of the document is, if it has a number.
It's page 7 I'm going to ask about. No, this was not listed because I didn't know they were going to ask that question. This is cross-examination impeachment. As my friend Mr. Brody said earlier during this trial, I intend to impeach on the subject that he just brought up because they did market opioids to pregnant women.
Your Honor, is this, I just want to ask Mr. Whitman, the source of the document, I don't recognize the number down at the bottom. It has a PPLPC prefix.
These are Purdue documents, I think you're aware of this, that by stipulation, they've admitted their business records before.
I don't know if this is one. I thought the stipulation pertained to records that were documents that were on the exhibit.
That is one of their documents pursuant to that stipulation, is what I'm being told.
I haven't seen it.
It's subject to Purdue stipulation number 7.
Yeah, I have this document stipulation. I thought the stipulation is really the documents that were actually on the exhibit.
That would be an error. It's Purdue stipulation number 7. It's filed with the court. I don't have it in my hand, but we filed it with the court. And it is a document I intend to show to contradict the statement that was made right here in open court.
Well, it's a proper impeachment. Your Honor, you impeach a witness. And it's a Purdue document. It's not an exhibit. So we object to using it.
You know, I think he's right. I'm not impeaching Commissioner White. It is rebuttal evidence. I'm rebutting a point I didn't know he was going to bring up. He brought it up in open court, and it's demonstrably false. And I think we either make it an exhibit or we make it a court's exhibit, and the court can, you know, we don't have a jury trial here. The court can weigh the evidence as appropriate and give it whatever credit you want to give it, Your Honor.
It looks to be a collection of newspaper articles or editorials from Kentucky.
Those things were produced to us by Purdue, and stipulation number 7 addressed them. We filed it with the court. Had no idea we were going to need it.
Are you strictly asking about the one that ends in the number 7?
Yes, sir.
The July 18, 2003 Louisville, Kentucky article?
Yes, sir.
I think it's August 12th, 2003.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
I think it's maybe page 6.
I don't have it in front of me.
I think you were on the page he said, but I think it's actually page 6.
It's got a
The
bait.
Pasek article.
Correct.
Yes, sir. It's got a bait stamp number. Maybe I should give you that. It's 6206 for the last 4 digits. It's a Louisville Courier Journal article by Stephen D. Pasek. And I would like to display it and have the witness talk about it because it rebuts the point they brought up during cross-examination of Commissioner White, and she's aware of it.
We're looking at the stipulation, Mr. Wood. Which number is this in stipulation number 7?
7,
Stip 7, which number of document the last one?
the last one.
35?
I don't have it in front of me, Steve.
Well, that's referring to a single article. Doesn't have a base number associated with it. We would object, Your Honor, on that basis. It's not even clear that the stipulation relates to this. I don't have attachments to it.
Pursuant to an agreement with them, they produced it to us. That's what the stipulation was about. That's why we gave it to the court. And as I said, I didn't know it was going to come up. I'd have no way.
I overrule the defendant's objection. I will allow for this article to be published as a demonstrative aid. We can give it a court exhibit number later.
Thank you, Your Honor. May we publish it on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, let's read along here. I've highlighted parts of this. Now, you see this was written by their number 2 key opinion leader, Stephen D. Pasek. We highlighted it there in red. You see that?
I do.
And this was written, it looks like August 12, 2003. You see there at the top?
I do.
Let's go to where I've highlighted it. It says, however, the article misrepresents medical facts about drug dependency, and addiction. Despite what the nurse in the article was quoted as saying, babies cannot be, quote, born addicted, end quote, to drugs. Do you see that?
I do see that.
When a woman abuses drugs while pregnant, it is possible for her child to become physiologically dependent on that substance. But dependency is treatable with proper care and is not the same as addiction. At birth, babies do not have the mental capacity to develop the psychological syndrome of use, despite harm and uncontrolled compulsive use of substances that separate addiction from physiological dependence. Am I reading it right so far?
That's what it says. That information is not correct.
Let me just keep reading. The alarming portrayal of newborns as, quote, addicts, end quote, not only perpetuates myths and fears that already exist surrounding the use of illicit drugs, but also can bleed out and affect the perception of the use of licit drugs, such as pain medications. Did I read that right so far?
That's what it says.
Let's skip over to the next column where I have it highlighted. Opioids do not cause birth defects. Witness the birth of children to women on methadone maintenance. And the newborn can be safely tapered off of them without withdrawal. You see where I read?
I see where you read.
Let's go to the next column where I have highlighted. Why did the article characterize babies as, quote, addicted, end quote, when the source of the information provided the number of babies, quote, exposed, end quote, to opiates? Shouldn't the article have stressed that under a doctor's care, chronic pain during pregnancy can be safely treated? Did I read that right?
That's what the words say.
Is that consistent with what you heard during your cross-examination when you were told that they had never marketed the use of opioids to pregnant women?
Their number 2 KOL printed an editorial that has absolutely false information in it, first about addiction, as you heard Dr. Kolodny test to, as you heard Dr. Beeman test to, and explaining this nonsense idea that there's some sort of difference between dependence and addiction, as if that's some bright line that is absolutely not true and has been shared clearly, and worse, and most offensively goes on to talk about how there is not such thing as a baby going through withdrawal. And I would say that the video that we watched and the testimony we heard from Ms. Ratliff says something clearly very different, and it is not correct. This is misinformation, again, spread by their number 2 KOL.
Well, that's what this whole lawsuit's about, isn't it?
Yes.
Convincing people that opioids aren't as dangerous as they really are. Correct?
That's correct.
Now, I want to call your attention to a very narrow question, just one question Mr. Brody asked you. Do you remember on cross-examination, Mr. Brody asking you this question? We shouldn't second-guess decisions made by doctors in prescribing opioids. You remember that?
I do.
Well, let's take that ball and run with it, as they say in football. Isn't that exactly what they're doing when they market to physicians that opioids are not very dangerous, they're rarely addictive? Aren't they second-guessing what doctors already knew back when we had narcotic conservatism before 1996?
It's worse than that. They're trying to tell doctors that there's this thing called undertreated pain, and they're telling doctors, and we saw call notes, when doctors said they had concerns about abuse, they told them why they shouldn't.
Let's finish talking about the DUR board minutes. There's a few left. Do you remember he discussed an alarming increase? Hold on, that's the wrong question. Do you remember him showing you some DR board minutes from August 12, 2009? I think this is Jansen 1171.
I believe so.
And may we put that up, Your Honor?
Yes.
Page 14 of that document. Okay, you remember seeing this? This is page, it's the 14th page of that exhibit. You remember when he showed you this document?
I remember seeing it. I can't remember if I saw it, if he showed it to me today or if I saw it during the trial.
Mike, can you put up the first page? Maybe that'll help recall, because it's been a few hours since he showed it to you.
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you.
It was a Drug Utilization Review Board. This was September 9, 2009, and I don't believe you were there, but he showed it to you. Remember
Yes,
that?
I don't remember if he let me look at that page, the second page you showed me,
Okay.
but yes.
Well, there's been a bunch of them. He showed it to you. Let's look. Did he show you that contained therein, it's a letter from an Oklahoma doctor to the DUR board that he did not bring to your attention? Now, I think we have it up there. Do you see that?
I do see it.
Okay. And does this letter advocate for or against step therapy for drugs to treat pain?
Hold on, I'm reading it since I haven't seen it before.
Take your time. I know it's kind of long. We'll see if we can speed it up and help you by highlighting part of it,
Oh, okay.
but still keep reading it.
I am.
Okay, do you see my part of that question there?
Yes.
Do you recall the testimony of Dr. Andrew Kolodny earlier in the case regarding Johnson & Johnson's use of unbranded marketing through third-party patient advocacy groups?
Yes.
Do you recall him testifying about the American Pain Foundation was one of those groups?
Yes.
In fact, that was Johnson & Johnson's go-to partner.
Yes.
And do you see the Oklahoma doctor in this letter here by Will Rowe, CEO of the American Pain Foundation?
Not well, but I see it.
Can you highlight that, Mike? Lisa, can you help Mike find that and highlight it? Well, we blew it up, but it got a little bit fuzzy. Let me just bring you the document. This might be better than blow up. Will Rowe, CEO of the American Pain Foundation.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yeah, and I can kind of read it up there, actually.
And what does it say about these patient advocacy groups there and the American Pain Foundation? Do you see him addressing for or against step therapy?
Is that the best copy we have? I can't read a word on that.
Let's see if we can. This is their exhibit. You guys have a spare copy for the judge?
We may have a clearer copy with Ms. Conway could put up on the screen.
Janice, can you pull it up? Maybe you have it better.
J1171.
Yours may be better than the one we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up at the top, the second paragraph. Can you blow that up, Mike?
It would be Janice.
Hey, that's better.
Slightly.
Quite a bit better. You see Will Rowe, CEO of the American Pain Foundation. Have you found the part we're talking about, for or against step therapy by insurers?
Yes.
And what does this gentleman advocate?
Dear editor, people with invisible pain conditions such as fibromyalgia are suffering needlessly due to overly restrictive healthcare plans. With step therapy, insurers make it next to impossible for patients to receive appropriate access to medically necessary care that they need.
Now, with Mr. Brody's questioning, he's telling on the one hand that the DUR board's failure to do enough in the form of quantity limits or step therapy is a cause of the opioid epidemic. And yet its partner here is arguing the opposite, against step therapy.
That's correct. And if you go on in the document, you can't see it on this screen now, but if you look at what would be the, I believe, fourth full paragraph right there. I'm also attaching a position statement. I'm also attaching a position statement on step therapy and therapeutic switching from the American Pain Foundation, one of our collaborators.
Commissioner, Mr. Brody showed you a lot of these DUR board meeting minutes today and yesterday. He's asked you about quite a few different opioids, hydrocodone, oxycodone, Duragesic, Nucynta. You remember him asking about all those drugs?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember him asking you about tramadol? I didn't hear him say anything about tramadol.
No, and in fact, what I saw on some of the documents is that he would highlight the drugs except not highlight tramadol.
Well, so who invented tramadol?
Johnson & Johnson and Janssen.
And they marketed a drug called Ultram and another drug called Ultram ER. And what was the key ingredient in those drugs?
Opioids?
Yeah.
It's an opioid?
Well, specifically it's tramadol, isn't it?
Yes.
So let's talk about tramadol a little bit. Let's pull up Johnson & Johnson Exhibit 2942A. I think this is one of the ones he showed you in your cross-examination. Janice, your copy is going to be better than us. Are you guys okay if I have Janice pull that up? 2942A. Please. Let's pull the front page up first.
Which physician? I think she has more.
Oh, you have it by physician? Ours isn't done by physician. We're looking for a page called tramadol. Where's the physician's name? We're looking for an information point about tramadol. It says the page titled Tramadol Abuse Information.
October 26, 2004 minutes of the Oklahoma State Board of Pharmacy.
Oh, that one.
I can show you the page, Steve. I think you used it.
Yeah.
Does that help, Janice? Thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay. Let's pull that up. So I don't believe he showed you the last few pages of that document. Let's turn to the page called Tramadol Abuse Information. Can you do that, Janice? It's in quotes, Tramadol Abuse Information. Okay, there we got it. Thank you, I appreciate that. And can you read the first bullet point there, Commissioner?
Yes, I can.
What does it say?
National Survey on Drug Use and Health, NSDA, reports that lifetime non-medical users of tramadol increased from 0.1 million in 2002 to 0.2 million in 2003. Among youth ranging in age from 12 to 17, the number of non-medical users rose from 52,000 to 186,000 during the same time frame.
Let's look at the bullet point number 7 on that same page. I think there are quite a few statistics in here regarding addiction to tramadol that Mr. Brody did not point out to you, and I'd like to ask you about that. Do you see that?
I do. I'm not sure which one is the 7th bullet because I can't see the whole document now.
Can you see Ortho McNeil's package insert describes Ultram as
Yes.
essentially acting synthetic opioid analgesic. It should not be used in opioid-dependent patients. Dependence and abuse, including drug-seeking behavior and taking illicit actions to obtain the drugs, are not limited to those patients with prior history of opioid dependence.
Yes,
You see where I'm reading from?
I do.
And now, Mr. Brody also pointed out to you some DUR board minutes dated June 11, 2014. I think this is Johnson 1644. I don't know if Mike, I don't know if you can pull that up, or we're going to have to use Janice again. Janice, do you mind pulling that one up? 1644. There we go. I think we're going to look at page 61. There are some products by claim fiscal year. You see what I'm looking at? What's the third product from the top?
Tramadol.
Okay, and now let's turn to page 25 in that document. Okay, there's a chart at the bottom called Most Common Opioid Medications Used in Pregnancy. And what is number 4 listed on that chart?
Tramadol products.
You have an opinion about that?
I have an opinion that, as we saw in the article, where there's number 2 KOL is saying that tramadol is, that opioids are safe, that babies born with NAS syndrome do not go through withdrawal, which the video clearly shows is not the case, that their tramadol products were being given to pregnant women in the state of Oklahoma.
Commissioner, I don't recall very many questions being asked about the abatement plan in more than a day of examination. Do you stand by your abatement plan as being reasonable and necessary?
I absolutely do.
And do we need that abatement plan to abate this epidemic that they caused?
We need that abatement plan to abate the epidemic that they caused. That abatement plan is using evidence-based practices. It is comprehensive. It includes prevention, which is gold standard prevention, along with gold standard treatment, along with gold standard overdose prevention. We need it. With it, over 30 years, we can and will abate the opioid crisis.
Is there anything more important than either a state or a manufacturer, a responsible business entity? Is there anything more important than just telling the truth?
No.
Even if it hurts?
No.
And if they wanted to admit that they contributed or caused the opioid epidemic, they could come up with their own abatement plan. Maybe they'd have some wisdom that you haven't thought of, right? They didn't do that.
Well, I don't know how you want me to suggest that.
Sustained.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. White, do you still have the 2003 Purdue document in front of you?
I might. What is the 2003 Purdue document?
The article by Dr. Pasek.
Oh, yes, I think I do. Hold on one second. The Louisville Courier Journal? Is that
Yep,
the one you're looking
you got
for?
it?
Yes, I do.
And what's the date of that?
Tuesday, August 12th, 2003.
And Ms. Conway, can you bring up states 1350? It's already in evidence. We can go to page 4. And let's pull out Dr. Pasek down at the bottom there. How much money did Janssen give to Dr. Pasek in 2003?
It looks like Janssen gave Dr. Pasek $2,000 in 1997, $407 in 1998, $7,000.
My question, I'm sorry, Ms. White. My question was, how much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 2003?
I don't see 2003 on here.
How much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 2002?
I don't see 2002 on here. I see Janssen gave
How
him
much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 2001?
The years that I see that Janssen gave him money were 1997, 1998, 2009, 2011, and 2012.
How much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 2001?
It's not on here.
How much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 2000?
I don't know because it's not on here.
How much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 1999?
I don't know because it's not on here.
And then how much money did Janssen give Dr. Pasek in 1998?
$407.16.
All right, you can set the Purdue document aside. But I do have a question about Purdue for you. Who manufactured and marketed OxyContin?
OxyContin was manufactured by Purdue. OxyContin name brand marketing was done by Purdue, but opioid non-branded marketing related to the sales of all opioids, including OxyContin, was done by Johnson & Johnson and Janssen as well.
You were asked some questions about the document that was handed to you, States 37. You have that in front of you?
I don't know, what is it?
These are some internal media talking points. You remember this? And Mr. Whitten handed it to you?
I believe you. I don't know if I have this document. Hold on.
It has an exhibit sticker on it. It says S0037. Here, you can have my copy.
Okay.
If I may, for a minute.
Yes.
And that's Mr. Whitten's highlighting, not mine.
Is this the Duragesic media kit?
What's the date on that document?
I'm looking.
It's up at the top.
I see FDA Advisory Committee Media Response Document, March 29, 2002.
All right, thank you. You were asked by Mr. Whitten question, why do opioids even need to be marketed? You remember that question?
I do.
Do you think they should be?
Do I think that you should be marketing opioids?
Do you think that opioids should be marketed?
In the middle of the worst opioid crisis in the history of the United States happening here in Oklahoma, and we've lost over 6,000 Oklahomans, I do not believe that you should be marketing opioids.
All right, thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Very briefly to follow up, Your Honor.
Yes.
Your Honor, my examination was solely within the scope.
I haven't asked a question yet.
I'm going to give him latitude, and I'll give you the same latitude if you need it.
I'm going to follow up on exactly the questions you asked. Let's start with Purdue. You remember he asked you who made OxyContin, and he said it was Purdue.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Do you know who is Purdue's partner?
Yes.
This is going to be way outside the scope of the question I just asked you.
It's-
a simple question, which was, who is it that marketed OxyContin?
May I respond?
That was the only question. There's one question, Your Honor.
May I
Now we're
respond?
going to do document.
Mr. Whitten, please respond to Mr. Brody's
Very
objection.
quick response. He brought it up, I think, to highlight the point. It's not us, it's Purdue, and yet this document shows they consider Purdue to be their partner. I think it's highly relevant to that one question.
Your Honor,
Highly relevant.
there's a question about who markets OxyContin.
I overrule the objection.
Okay. Who do they consider, this is a Janssen document, who do they consider to be their partner?
Purdue.
Partners for 5 years.
Purdue.
Okie dokie. Now let's move on to the second question he asked you about, which was Mr. Pasick and how much money he was paid. You remember that question?
Yes.
Okay. Despite how much money he got, it was Janssen and Johnson that listed them, Mr. Pasick, as their number 2 KOL. Right?
Correct.
Object to that, Your Honor. Mischaracterizes the document.
It's in the document that I introduced. It shows him to be the number 2 KOL. It's on that document.
Overrule.
Thank you. That right?
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing else.
Mr. Brody, is there anything in those two questions? Okay.
They should be excused.
Commissioner White may be excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I take all my stuff with me?
Earlier today, I was presented a stipulation by the parties. I won't read it, but I want to make sure I understand that the state has called its second to last witness, Ms. White, and they anticipate calling a remaining witness, Drew Dieselhorse, but she is unavailable on vacation, and I've granted the state the ability to call her out of turn, so the state would not be resting, and I'm prepared to let the defendant start its case in chief, even though the state's not complete yet. Is that what the parties have stipulated to?
That's correct, Your Honor.
That is correct, Your Honor. They drafted up a stipulation, we signed it, and I think it's been filed, has it not, Steve?
The stipulation has been endorsed by the court and filed as well.
Yes, yes, okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and break for today, and we'll start again at 8:30 tomorrow morning, and anticipate the defendants, you will call your first witness, correct? All right. Thank you very much. You may be excused.